Our first reading this morning is a poem called End Times by Pamela Todd. It sort of feels like end times these days, so I thought I'd sit with him. A note about this, there is a poet who makes comment about physics. There's at least one physicist with us this morning. I don't know how physicists feel about poets making comments about physics, so we're going to sit with poetry of it today. End Times by Pamela Todd. What if the second coming has already come? And those fearful faces, expecting judgment to rain down from the tormenting skies, lifting the raptured and leaving the rest of us behind, had it all wrong. I love that the poet assumes that there will be one of the left behind, as will the hearers. I think that's a fair assessment. Right? Time is an illusion, physicists say. Everything that has been or will be is happening right now. Is it too much to hope that love, this is a capital L, love, is it too much to hope that love is still with us? To believe that soft and sweet-scented child lying peacefully in a manger among the angels and animals still reaches out, longing to hold and feed us, still waits to light this pitch-black winter of our souls. Maybe the dawn of love is as real and omnipresent as the spreading bleakness. Maybe the judgment has already come, and we have been found not perfect, but at least worth a second chance. Our Bible reading for this morning, one of the assigned lessons for the day, comes from the book of Acts. Again, stories of the early Jesus movement. This comes kind of in the middle of narrating Paul's many missionary journeys. It says, one night while we were in Troas, Paul had a vision. A Macedonian person stood before him and said, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." After this vision, we immediately made efforts to get across to Macedonia, convinced that God had called us to bring them the good news. We put out to sea from Troas and set a course straight from Samothrace. You don't have to memorize all of these places. And the next day on to Neapolis. From there we went to Philippi, which is one of the bigger cities in Macedonia and a Roman colony, and we spent a few days there. On the Sabbath, we went along the river outside the gates thinking we might find a place of prayer there. And we sat down and preached to the women who had come to the gathering. One of them was named Lydia, a devout woman from the town of Thyatira, and who was in the purple dye trade. As she listened to us, Christ opened her heart to accept what Paul was saying. After she and her household were baptized, she extended us an invitation. If you're convinced that I am a believer, then please come and stay with us. And we accepted. That's our Bible reading for the day. What gives you hope? This will be an open question. If anyone wants to call out, or folks on Zoom, you'll be able to unmute yourself. My question is, what gives you hope? Like, are there things that are automatic pick-me-ups for you that you can reliably turn to when the world feels too much? I would love to hear some of those. Priscilla says, sunshine on her skin. Music, says Kate. Music. Coffee. Coffee. That gives awareness and hope. Right? Becky's got one.
Children.
Children. Okay. And Jack was clapping at that, I think.
The singing of the birds.
The singing of the birds, says Jaime. Thank you. Who's right by an open window. Thank you. I will invite you to, hold on. Well, I'm going to, hang on a sec. There. I was just realizing that I was broadcasting my backside to Zoom from the laptop behind me, so I thought I would turn that screen off. So I want to invite you to hold on to all of these things that have been named, these things that give you hope this morning, and maybe just return to them in your mind if you need them, because I'm going to be talking kind of about the opposite of hope in my sermon, starting with this question that I heard this week. How do we serve a loving and good God when we are living in hell? Which is a heck of a question. So this week I attended a workshop that was put on by Faith in Action, which is a nationwide faith-based advocacy group. And our local group, Power Interfaith, is connected through Faith in Action. The workshop was a series, it was part of a series of events called Rise and Vote. It happened over 3 days. I went on Wednesday to the part that was specifically geared towards clergy, because our Power organizer had invited me to go down. The question came from Power's executive director, Bishop Dwayne Royster. He's preached for us at least once. He gave an opening analysis of the moments, these days that we are living in, starting by looking back to 2016, when many in the progressive faith-based orbit assumed we were on the cusp of having our first woman president. Imagine that. At least twice during that year, he said, he tried telling the leadership at Faith in Action that he feared a very different outcome. But nobody seemed to believe that it was possible until it was. So he asked, how do we serve a loving and good God when we are living in hell? It was a timely reflection as it came on the heels of a primary election in which more than 40% of the voters in one of our major parties in this state opted for a full-throated white Christian nationalist who denies the results of the 2020 election, organized a bus trip to the U.S. Capitol on January 6th of last year, and openly and unabashedly has attended at least one event put on by self-professed QAnon prophets. Yeah, everybody thought the last guy was a joke too, which makes Bishop Royster's question and his caution all the more pressing. Knowing what could well happen, what is it we have to do to change it? How do we be in the world when things look difficult? So I've been thinking this week a bit about hope and about hopelessness. A couple of weeks ago, I said this. I said, it takes a certain foolishness and temerity to believe in the good in the face of all evidence to the contrary. I stand by that statement. I want very much to believe in the good. I'm capitalizing those terms too. I do believe in that. And so I am willing to embrace a certain level of foolishness. Nothing I say this morning should be taken as encouragement to just sink into a paralysis of despair. But I do wonder if there is a certain usefulness to embracing hopelessness. In an essay called When Hope is a Hindrance, the author, Samantha Rose Hill, reflects on the work of the 20th century philosopher Hannah Arendt and her judgment of hope. Arendt was born in Germany to a Jewish family early in the 20th century. When the Nazi Party rose to power, she was briefly detained. When she got out of prison, she fled to Czechoslovakia, then to Switzerland, ultimately to Paris. But then the Nazis invaded France, and she and her husband were detained for a time before they could flee to the United States. Hill says in her essay that while Arendt and her husband were waiting for their exit papers that would allow them to leave the country, so this terrifying and tense time for them, they took the moment to take a break from their work, to explore the French countryside on bicycles, and to spend their days soaking in mystery novels. They didn't let panic stop them, but they seized that time, that hopeless time, as a gift. Not because they hoped everything would just turn out okay, because they knew that it might not. Hill says that a thread running through Arendt's work was the idea that hope turned people helpless, and that it destroyed humanity by turning people away from the world in front of them and preventing them from acting courageously in difficult times. In particular, as she looked at totalitarianism and fascism rising in her own age, she assessed that people could no longer count on common sense and human decency, on moral norms or ethical imperatives, because all of that stuff had fallen apart and evil had been justified. So the question is, are there times when hope is counterproductive? I think folks in the medical field can probably tell stories about when it is. There are too many stories of people who subject themselves to treatments that end up prolonging their suffering because they think that hope means you have to try everything possible that there is. When I was a hospice worker, I saw too much of that. I saw a lot of people who missed out on the support that they could have had over months because they thought that hope meant refusing to acknowledge their mortality. I don't mean to armchair quarterback anyone's particular choices for themselves or what those ought to be. I'm just noticing something that I observed quite a lot. This question about hope and hopelessness goes far beyond medical and individual choices. I can't tell you how many times in my classes I have heard some version of, "But things are better now than they used to be," every semester. And I get that to some extent. It is undeniable that there has been some progress in some areas. After all, most of my students were in middle school or high school when the Supreme Court ruled that gay marriage is legal. They can take that for granted for now as young adults. That feels like real progress. It's a benchmark by which they can judge the past and find it wanting. But we were literally in the midst of talking about a report on white Christian nationalism and the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, when one of my stronger students, not my best student, but one of my stronger students, came up with that comment about things being better than they used to be, which felt incongruous in that conversation. I'll note that I hear versions of this far more often from my Westchester students than my Rutgers-Camden students, and Westchester has a decidedly wider student body. I think that's not a coincidence. In an essay titled "Hope is Not Optimism," David and Feldman and Benjamin Korn argue that hope is not wishful thinking, optimism, or the power of positive thinking. True hope isn't about living in a fantasy world. It's about living in this one. And the truth about this one is that some things have not gotten better. The truth about this one is that 2020 didn't solve the previous 4 years. The truth about this one holds the current leaders of Florida and Texas. The truth about this one is that white supremacy feels free to talk about its bogus replacement theory out loud and in public. The truth about this one is the Tops Friendly supermarket in Buffalo. The truth about this one is a leaked Supreme Court draft. The truth about this one is that vulnerable people are still vulnerable. If hope means pretending that all of that isn't there, then truly there is a need for us to embrace and sit with some hopelessness. But maybe this is just me and my temperament, maybe we can call it a hopeful kind of hopelessness. In that essay about hope not being optimism, the authors say that hope at its heart is a perception. Unlike most perceptions, however, this one has the possibility of creating reality. When people believe a goal they care about is possible to achieve, they're more likely to take steps to make it happen. Which is not to say that the goal will be achieved or achieved in full, but focusing on the power to act even when things seem bleak, can be a kind of hopeful hopelessness. In this morning's Bible reading, Paul and his companions were moving in the uncertainty that comes with conviction but not finding immediate success. Maybe you noticed there was a good bit of wandering about and waiting. I had this vision where we had to go and talk to people, and then they went from place to place to place till they could figure out what they were doing. It seems like very little success, aimed at building a movement but not sure who might want to join that or how to do it, until they made a connection and a relationship that opened up a foothold for them. A hopeful hopelessness, acting without guarantees because the action is the right thing to do. This week I read a couple of powerful stories. One about a doctor named Yulia Payevska who took this hopeful hopelessness to heart in Ukraine to talk about living in hell. She goes by the nickname Tyra, which is her screen name apparently in the video game world of Warcraft, which I guess is like entertainment coming to life these days in Ukraine. She had been working in a military hospital in Mariupol using a body camera and a 256 gigabyte data drive to try and record what was going on and get it out to the world. She got that data card to the Associated Press, smuggled out in a tampon the day before she was detained by Russian soldiers. One clip in the videos that she captured shows at that military hospital 2 Russian soldiers being taken out of an ambulance very roughly. One of them was in a wheelchair, one was on his knees with his hands tied behind his back and a very obvious leg wound. Both of them were blindfolded, and one of her people, a Ukrainian soldier, started to swear at those injured Russian soldiers. And she says to him on camera, "Calm down, calm down." And a woman says, "Are you going to treat the Russians?" She says, "They will not be as kind to us, but I don't do otherwise. They are prisoners of war." And then the AP article describes her as a whirlwind of energy and grief. The videos show an unflinching look at the brutality of war. They also show her determined action. Another clip shows her again attending to a wounded Russian soldier. She told her colleagues to wrap him in a blanket because he was shivering and cold. He says to her in disbelief, you're taking care of me." And she says, "We treat everyone equally." In the middle of war. Closer to home, out in the Lehigh Valley the other day, a white Lyft driver named James Bode was hailed to a bar to pick up a woman who happened to be the bar's owner and to pick up her boyfriend with her. She climbed into the back of his car. She saw him, the white driver, and she was surprised. "Wow, like you're like a white guy," she says. He was clearly taken aback. I said, "Excuse me?" And she doubled down. She said, "You're like a normal guy? You speak English?" And she laughed and patted him on the shoulder. A lot of us might have rolled our eyes, gritted our teeth, and just tried to get that ride over with, because white supremacy is that pervasive, that boring. It's just that out in the open these days. But James Bode did something differently. He told her to get out of his car. He said that is completely inappropriate. If someone who was not white was sitting in this seat, what would be the difference? At which point, the boyfriend swore at him, threatened violence, and called him a racist epithet, all of which now lives on the internet. And they did not get that ride. In that essay on Hannah Arendt, Samantha Rose Hill says that Arendt sees faith and hope in human affairs arising from the fact that each new person born into the world has the ability to create something new, to act, and so to set in motion a chain of events, the outcome of which cannot be predicted. In this way, faith and hope are not articles of belief, but action. That's Hannah Arendt saying hope only resides in the next generations at some level, which children do give hope. I think it was Becky that said that. Children do give hope. But I also want to suggest maybe we who inhabit a faith tradition that has language of calling and of rebirth can say that we're born into each new day with the calling to act justly. So we probably do need a bit of hopelessness, if that means believing that bad things happen, because they clearly do. But I think it's got to be a hopeful kind of hopelessness, because we also have the power to act inside of whatever the circumstances are. That won't look the same for all of us. Some people should do whatever their version of Hannah Arendt's riding around the French countryside in a bicycle and reading mystery novels is. Because really those people who bear the brunt of the day's evil should not hold the greatest responsibility for acting against it. But all of us can hold to this, that when the world acts against wholeness, when it works toward fracture and fragmentation, when there is every reason to feel despair, we still live in, as part of, with a spirit that calls us to act and to believe that our action matters, because it does. And this is God's good news. Amen.